Security teams need network data to threat hunt and resolve incidents, but find that PCAP is often too much data and NetFlow isn't enough. Corelight was founded by the creators of Zeek, formerly Bro, and its sensors provide just the right amount of data, transforming raw traffic into comprehensive logs, extracted files, and custom insights so analysts can make fast sense of traffic and move the speed of attack. To find out why Corelight is your best next move in security, visit securityweekly.com/Corelight. Signal Sciences secures the most important web applications, APIs, and microservices of the world's leading companies. Protecting over 7,500 applications and 150 billion production requests per week, Signal Sciences Next-Gen WAF and RASP help companies increase security and maintain site reliability without sacrificing velocity, all at the lowest total cost of ownership. Signal Sciences' patented technology protects any application against any attack, with integrations into any DevOps toolchain. Signal Sciences, demand more from your WAF. Learn more at signalsciences.com/PSW. The greatest threat to businesses today isn't the outsider trying to get in. It's the people you trust, the ones who already have the keys, your employees, contractors, and privileged users. 60% of online attacks are carried out by insiders. To stop these insider threats, you need to see what users are doing before an incident occurs. Observe It enables security teams to detect risky user activity, investigate incidents in minutes, and effectively respond. Get your free trial at observeit.com/securityweekly. Welcome back, everyone, to Enterprise Security Weekly. Some of you have told us that you're overwhelmed by the amount of content we distribute. To make things a little easier, you can go to securityweekly.com/subscribe, join our listener interest lists, and as soon as I get my code working, which could be a while, we're going to roll out a feature that you will be able to get notified when content that you're interested in is published here on Security Weekly. Our interview for this segment is David Harding, an accomplished international executive with more than 25 years of technology implementations and management experience. David, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And Matt, I believe you did the prep for this interview, so...
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, I
Okay.
mean, David, so just to give you a little background, right, is Paul and I worked together at Tenable, and now we're working together again at Security Weekly. And one of the hypotheses we came up with a number of years ago is that as we move through digital transformation and organizations, enterprises continue to connect more closely with their consumers, we're going to see this big shift in technology. And for me, that means there's really only three things that matter long term in the security game for me. It's application security, identity, user security, and data security. Those are those things that transform whatever's going to happen at the network, the endpoint, et cetera. And so I'm always interested in the identity problem and who's out there solving aspects of the identity problem. So that's where I want to start. Articulate some of the challenges today with the digital identity and what are people struggling with?
Well, that's a great question. The bottom line is people are struggling with the same thing they've been struggling with for years, which is to actually authenticate an identity and to know that the person that they're claiming to be is who they are. We're using the same technology that we've been using for hundreds of years to identify people, including in networks and in enterprise security, which is the username and password. I anecdotally tell the story that, there was several hundred years ago that the first documented use of a password was used. It was used by a Greek army, and it got compromised, and they lost a pivotal battle. In fact, they got slaughtered. We're still using that technology today to identify users, and it's failing. It's always failed. Over 80% of the data breaches that exist out there have nothing to do with application security. They have nothing to do with network security. They have everything to do with compromised password, a compromised identity. So identity, as you pointed out, is an absolutely critical element. And I agree with your 3 points there as you have to have application security, you have to have data security. Those are critical, but identity security has really lagged behind those 2 things. And that's unfortunate because it represents the largest threat surface.
Right. And I think the challenge is we took a very old concept, username, password, and then we layered a bunch of complexity on top of it. Multi-factor authentication, biometrics, all these other things. And we've actually made it more complex to adopt some of these technologies because it's so hard to use. The example I give, my wife's an RN, and she goes in and she has to sign into various systems on her nursing station. And she's like, why do I have to have different usernames and passwords? Why can't I just use my fingerprint, my biometric, to log into all these systems? Why can't I do that? Why do I have to remember all this craziness? Why do I have to change my passwords every 90 days? And the list goes on and on and on. And we've layered so much of this stuff on over time that it's not usable anymore, which is why we probably still have the big problem that we have.
That's very true. In fact, if you take a look at complex passwords, those it started off with 8 characters. Now it's a minimum of 10. It's alphanumeric, mixed case, special character. That was supposed to add more security. That was supposed to make us safer and be able to keep the bad guys out. Actually made the situation worse. When you talk about friction, when you talk about adding friction to the identity verification process, it does start to break it down even further. It makes it worse. Why are complex passwords? Why don't they work? Well, because we write them down. They're easier to compromise than ever before. NIST actually came out and said, yeah, we told you to do that. Never mind, that doesn't work. Biometrics and two-factor authentication, that also adds friction. The fact of the matter is friction is necessary. The question comes down to how much friction and how do you do it in a way that truly authenticates the identity, does it quickly, and does it efficiently so that the end user is not aggravated by the process. And that's really one of the things that we at ImageWare really focus on is doing those two-factor and multi-factor biometric authentications, doing it in a way that is simple and fast. Because as you pointed out, a lot of these processes that we put in place are neither of those.
Right. Now, you do some interesting things from a proofing perspective, which I think is an interesting concept, right?
Yes.
Is that how do you know that the fingerprint is tied to me, right? And so that every time you see that fingerprint, you know it's me. And the reason I asked that question, and I think this is an intriguing problem to dig into a little bit before we talk about the rest, is we've seen examples of fingerprints being compromised, right? They can be potentially copied and reused over and over. So then under that scenario, how do you proof that my fingerprint is actually my fingerprint and not a copy of my fingerprint that somebody's been able to peel off of, my phone or a glass or whatever?
It's a great question. Fingerprint is a interesting topic, predominantly because around 30% of the global population doesn't have an easily read fingerprint. I'm one of them. I've been a musician for over 30 years. I've worn the ridges off of these 3 fingers. I have to re-enroll my fingerprint on my phone, my iPhone, about every 2 weeks. Same on my iPad, because it stops working. So that's a friction element. But that really doesn't address the issue of how do you know whose fingerprint you're actually using. Well, you're right. Fingerprints are, you leave them everywhere. In fact, the Computer Chaos Club, when they hacked the iPhone about half an hour or an hour after it first came out, using household equipment or household materials, said you should not use this as a security token, something you leave everywhere. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that fingerprint is bad, but it does have some interesting fallacies, which is why you can't count on one specific biometric. Face is a great example of something that adds very little friction. But you also have to account for something through something called anti-spoofing. Is it a presentation attack? Is somebody using a 3D mask or a high-resolution photo? Or is something as simple as a video? You have to be able to catch those things. And then there's where is the biometric stored and how is it vetted prior to being enrolled? If you look at match-on-device technology on your Android and your iPhone today, or on your laptops, that's pretty prevalent. The problem with that technology is that it doesn't say that this fingerprint belongs to this person, and it can't vet that. In fact, many of us, myself included, have multiple fingerprints enrolled on our phone. My wife's fingerprint is enrolled on my phone for a very benign and simple reason, just to change the music in the car. So when I write an application to talk to iPhone, to iTouch, all it says is if I invoke capturing a fingerprint to do a verification, it says, yeah, somebody's fingerprint that is enrolled on this phone matches. It doesn't tell me whose. So match on device presents a series of issues associated with that. The other one is making sure that you have the right identity at enrollment time. And that means truly vetting the person prior to enrolling the biometrics. So you have to go through a series of processes. We have a very specific product to support that, where we're able to vet the identity, work against government issued identity cards, passports, et cetera, and then actually work against different agencies in the background to make sure that the addresses that they're putting down match to where they've lived, that their birth date's correct, that any other form of identification that is more on the knowledge-based side actually matches. And then David, you can have a biometric that works.
And David, too, also, a lot of the things we talk about with biometrics are really two different types of attack classes. One of the physical attacks, like the silly putty and, all the different things for fingerprints and whatnot. The other thing is on your phone, for example, your fingerprint's not in most implementations an image of your fingerprint, right? It's stored as a hash in a secure store on your air quote secure store on your phone, which has had vulnerabilities, especially on Android, right? And is essentially stored in software on your phone, which is essentially just like your password, right? It's digitally stored on a device in software. And I think people get a false sense of security when something has a biometric. I think it's a great factor for it, right? But you have to understand, obviously, you guys know, right? The physical and software attacks, basically.
Right. No, and you're correct on that, and that's where a lot of the anti-spoofing comes into play. And you're correct on match on device, where your fingerprint is actually stored on your phone. It's stored as a biometric template. It's not stored as an image. A biometric template is basically a blob, and it contains matching or feature data. And then that becomes your enrollment, and it is stored. When you go to unlock your phone, another capture is taken, another template is created, and they're compared, and then you get a probabilistic result. And if it matches enough or reaches a certain threshold, then it says it's you. One of the things that's interesting is a lot of people do talk about templates as being hashes. Hashes actually are deterministic. It's either a pass or a fail. That's why passwords and pins are stored as hashes, and that's why they're so incredibly dangerous and can be compromised, because a hash doesn't really change. And again, any match against that's it's a binary choice. It's a pass or a fail. With biometrics, it's about probability. The other thing associated with that is once you've been able to take and create a biometric template, the storage of it becomes very critical. Now, match on device, this device, when they put fingerprint on this device, it wasn't done for security purposes. And that's something that a lot of people really don't understand, because that wasn't explained. It was really a convenience factor. It was easier to open the phone with your fingerprint than it was to type a PIN. And, you couldn't have somebody looking over your shoulder to type a PIN, right? If you use your fingerprint. If you just type your PIN, someone could see it. We saw that when Kanye West unlocked his phone at the White House, right? That's not real secure. And again, that comes back to easily compromised. So the other option to that is to actually store it in a centralized location through a SaaS model or through some sort of database. Now, obviously, the problem with that is that if you have a whole lot of biometrics stored in there and it gets hacked, it's not like with the phone where you pull out one biometric. You get a lot of biometrics. Even though they're just templates, they're not images, they're still biometric templates.
And can't be changed. Well, I mean, harder to change than your password.
Yes, indeed. If you're going to store in a central location, you really have to take into account not just the security of the data, and that's one of the things that was brought up as one of the legs in that three-legged stool: data protection, application protection, identity protection, or identity security. We actually have a series of patents around storing that data anonymously, so that you have multiple places where that data is managed. You have, for example, the personally identifiable information of the PII, usernames, birth dates, full names, addresses, that sort of stuff should never be stored with biometric data. They should be completely separated. In our platform, for example, in our service, they are completely isolated in a proprietary real-time database where the biometrics never leave. So not only are they encrypted, distributed, obfuscated, they're also completely anonymous. So you'd have to hack multiple sources. In fact, the identity of record's not in the cloud, just the biometrics. You'd have to hack an on-prem solution to get like an Active Directory or a ForgeRock LDAP to get the real identity. And then you'd have to hack our service to be able to get the biometrics and somehow match those up. Good luck. Those are the sorts of things you have to take into account when you start storing this type of private and critical information.
Yeah, I think, and it's interesting that, you bring up a great point that the fingerprint reader really wasn't intended to be necessarily a security. It was more of a convenience factor.
Right.
And then you look at Apple's move to the facial recognition. And I think for the first time, we saw facial recognition that was actually pretty secure. I mean, at least more secure than what we had in the past, and being able to hold up a picture of someone on a piece of paper and have that pass for someone's face, right?
Right. Yeah, that's very true. We have in fact, we just released a brand new anti-spoofing technology that works exceptionally well, and is able to detect all the sorts of presentation attacks, whether it's 3D mask, a high-res image, whether it's a video. It catches all of those presentation attacks and rejects. But if you look at Apple, again, the Face ID really is more of a convenience factor as well, because even though the technology is very cool in the sense that it's very difficult to spoof, you don't necessarily have to spoof it. If I see you at dinner and your phone is next to you and I surreptitiously grab it, tap it, and wave it in your general direction, it unlocks like that. So,
sounds like you've done that at dinner recently, David.
Well, I know where you eat.
That's awesome. Yeah.
So again, from a security perspective, anything that's based in match on device or has a almost 100% frictionless approach, it really isn't security. It's more security theater. It's more, okay, you can log in much more quickly. And when you consider that, like with Apple and Google, we now have our credit cards. I have my credit cards on my phone, and I can make payments with Apple Pay. It's a convenience to be able to use my fingerprint, aside from the fact that I have to enroll it every couple of weeks. But it is a convenience that I can use my fingerprint. The downside is I really don't know whose fingerprint is being used. I mean, I trust my wife. All our accounts are linked together, so it really doesn't matter. There's nobody else. But if they spoof or create a fingerprint that they can put on the sensor, all bets are off.
So when you think of, I was going to say, so as you think about the solutions here a little bit, right? You've got the proofing side, which is segregating PII from the biometric. You've got the authentication biometrics component. Then you've got the identity sources, which are, Active Directory, ForgeRock, all the other systems. And so by distributing those components, I guess what I'm hearing is all those components need to work together. They're distributed. And by having them segregated and separated, it makes it very hard to hack the identity data at that point.
Absolutely, especially the biometrics. If you look at the classic example was the Office of Personnel Management of the U.S. government, the OPM. OPM is the agency that does all the background checks. If you've ever gone through a background check for the federal government, depending on the level of security you were trying to get, security clearance you were trying to get, it's very intrusive. There's a lot of information that gets shared. They, in some cases, again, depending on what level of security clearance you're trying to get, they'll talk to your neighbors, they'll talk to your relatives, they'll talk to your friends. They know where you were born. Any piece of information you could possibly imagine, they dig into and they store it. And in this case, they stored it in a database, along with raw fingerprint images of millions of the identities that they did background checks for, including, government officials, like the then director Comey of the FBI. His fingerprints are in the wild because that database got hacked, and the biometrics were stored with the PII. So not only did they get all that highly sensitive textual data, they got his fingerprints and the images of his fingerprints in this particular case. So again, how you store the data is and how you protect it is absolutely critical.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, this has been a challenge. One of the things we see with a lot of these solutions is, they'll say, "Oh, just take all your identities, move them up into the cloud, and I'll manage them all for you." But as you said earlier, that creates the attack vector, right? Why isn't? Of course, everybody's going to go after that single source of all that data, because a single hack gives them access to all that information. But if you make it harder for the hackers, and they now need to go hack 3 different technologies and 3 different sites, and have to piece all that together to do it, we've just done something in identity and made it a lot harder for our information to get out there. And I think that's what's intriguing about what you guys have built.
Thank you. We're very excited about the fact that we have built a series of turnkey products. In this particular field, especially in biometrics, there's a lot of players who want to sell you an SDK. Here you go. Integrate this into your series of applications. Run this piece of information, and now you're going to make these REST calls. You're going to do all this work. We, on the other hand, provide turnkey solutions. Yes, we have the SDKs. Yes, we have the platform that's been proven worldwide. We manage some of the largest biometric databases in the world, everything from law enforcement to border control, airport security. We cover the entire country of Canada's biometric security has for over a decade. Because we have that secure platform and because of the architecture that we've put in place. But having the turnkey products that you can get started like right now, you can go to your iPhone or your iOS or your Google App Store, download an application for identity authentication, out-of-band identity authentication. If you're an IT administrator, you can put biometric authentication into your Active Directory infrastructure in minutes. It just installs, plugs into your Microsoft Management Console. You get to control your user authentication, 2-factor, multi-factor biometric authentication right within the same tools. You provision users, OUs, your groups and your hardware, all of that in a very seamless environment. And again, you're separating your data elements. You're putting your identity of record in this case is like Active Directory. But you're able to authenticate and put the biometrics in a completely different place where they're secure, where they don't leave the cache. It's real time, obfuscated, distributed. Now you have real security, and our customers are able to incorporate those things into their environments in minutes. And to your point about people saying, well, if you just put the identity in the cloud, I'm going to trust somebody else to secure that. I will use one word: Equifax. Most catastrophic data breach to date, not because of the sheer volume of identities. We've had data breaches that exposed more people than that, or more identities than just the Equifax hack. But Equifax had all the information about a person. I mean, that's the company that does all the knowledge-based authentication questions for banks. They do credit reports. They know where you've lived, how long you've lived there, what your income was, your birth date, your social security number, your driver's license numbers that you've ever had in any state. They had all that. They have all that information. So does Equifax, or so does Experian, so does TransUnion. And all 3 have suffered breaches, but Equifax's was monstrous. So when you have all that data in one place, that's just a rich target for the hackers.
Yep, totally agreed. Paul, any additional questions for David while we have him?
No, I think we're good. That was awesome, David. Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
And with that, we'll take a short break, come back with our next interview. Stay tuned.
Take care.